The Ukraine-Russia war continues with all its brutality. The sides are attacking each other with more intense and heavy weapons day by day. The region where the war was most heated is the Bakhmut front. While the Ukrainian army in the region is doing shooting training, on the other hand, it's hitting the Russian troops with mortars. Zelensky said in a statement that if we withdrew from Bakhmut, Putin, who smells blood, will come upon us more. It continues its attacks with a statement that we will never allow this. Russian losses continued to increase in the city of Bakhmut within the scope of the Russia-Ukraine war, which has been going on for about 14 months. The most severe clashes continue on the front line in the Donetsk region. Ukrainian soldiers in the 80th Motor Battalion deployed on the Bakhmut front, one of the most intense clashes in the Russia-Ukraine war, continue their shooting training while participating in the hot clashes. Bakhmut, which was surrounded by Russian forces from three sides and the inner-city clashes continued, became a place where the war in Ukraine was almost locked, especially on Avdiivka and Marinka and on the Bakhmut front, which is known as the hottest spot. The increasing military activities of the Ukrainian troops draw attention. Ukrainian rocket and artillery units struck a command post and 3 enemy concentration areas. In the report of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, it was stated that the missile and artillery units hit a command post, 3 areas where enemy manpower, weapons and military equipment were concentrated, as well as an enemy electronic warfare station. In addition, planes belonging to the Ukrainian Air Force carried out 5 air strikes on the areas where Russian military personnel and equipment were concentrated, inflicting consecutive blows on Russia. In turn, the Russian army continues its main efforts to conduct offensive operations in the Lyman, Bakhmut, Avdiivka, and Marinka directions. However, the Ukrainian forces successfully repulsed 40 enemy attacks by countering these attacks. Intense military activity of the Ukrainian army is observed in the direction of Bakhmut. Continuous explosion sounds are heard in the area where tanks tracked and other armored vehicles carrying infantry move at high speed. The concentration of Ukrainian soldiers who came together at various points of the front and entered Bakhmut, where inter-city conflicts intensified, shows how fierce war activities continue in this city. A brigade gathered at one point on the front and prepared to engage in the ongoing street clashes in Bakhmut gave information about the situation in the region. They stated that it's only possible to reach Bakhmut by their armored vehicles as roads are constantly under attack by completing the preparation of weapons and other equipment before the soldiers enter the front line. Like their comrades, we will fight for the victory as long as necessary. We will fight until the end. Everything will be fine. The situation is under our control. On the other hand, despite all the efforts of the Russian army, there has been no serious change in the front line, which is about 1,000 kilometers for months. We can also say that the counter-offensive of the Ukrainian army is expected to begin. Ukraine is preparing for a counter-offensive in the war that's been going on since February 24 last year. Kiev's plan is to end the occupation with a powerful offensive against Russia. At the front, tanks and battleships sent from the west will also play an important role in the counterattack. The date of the Ukrainian offensive will be determined by weather conditions, as well as the army's completion of its preparations in the east and south of Ukraine. The frozen ground in the winter turns into a swamp when the weather warms up in the spring. This situation severely limits the mobility of military units. The Ukrainian army, which has learned from the mistake of the Russians, is waiting for the weather to warm up in the coming weeks and the ground to become suitable for large-scale maneuvers of the military units to start the spring offensive. In this respect, it's stated that the counter-offensive of the Ukrainian army may begin in the second half of April or in May. Meanwhile, Western states' arms aid to Ukraine continues to increase. Some of the 100 Leopard 2 tanks that 12 different countries promised to send to Ukraine have arrived in the country. Accelerated training for Ukrainians on the use of these tanks continues in different countries. In addition, Poland decided to send 60 modernized T-72 tanks to Ukraine in addition to the 250 old-style T-72 Soviet tanks it had previously sent. Ukraine envisions mechanized troops to play an important role in breaking through the Russian lines. In addition, Western countries are supplying critically important mine clearance vehicles, mobile bridges, and mine-protected vehicles in a possible attack. In this respect, the ratio of Soviet standard weapons in Ukraine's inventory to NATO standard weapons was 5:1 at the end of last year, and this ratio is expected to reach 5:2 in the coming period with the new aid from the West. In other words, about a third of Ukraine's inventory will consist of weapons manufactured to NATO standards in the near future within the scope of the Great Offensive. Ukraine wants to advance to Melitopol through Zaporizhia and then cut off Russia's land connection with Crimea by taking Berdyansk. Yevgeny Prigozhin, head of the Wagner Group, also claims that the Ukrainian army has amassed 80,000 soldiers around Bakhmut and that Ukraine is planning to reach the Black Sea via Zaporizhia after besieging the Wagner forces in Bakhmut. In addition, Ukraine is expected to organize an amphibious operation towards Crimea via Kherson. There is also the question of Ukraine launching an eastward operation and then going south, cutting off Russia's land connection. However, it is not possible to know with certainty in advance which direction the Ukrainian army will launch an offensive. While Ukraine gave the impression that it would give weight to Kherson in the south in its 2022 autumn offensive, it took the Russians by surprise by launching a successful raid on Kharkiv in the north. In the face of these developments, the Russian army is making defensive preparations before the attack of Ukraine. In this context, the Russian army has dug trenches and laid mines at many points along the 1,000-kilometer front. On top of that, Russia's creating new lines of defense behind the front lines as seen in satellite photos. The Russian army is digging trenches in northern Crimea with trench-digging machines, digging tank trenches and laying dragon teeth to block the advance of Ukrainian tanks. On the other hand, the Russian army has dug a 30-kilometer-long trench on the beaches of Vatino in Crimea, 160 kilometers south of Kherson, which is under Ukrainian control against a possible amphibious operation. Similarly, the Russians dug another trench of about 70 kilometers between the cities of Melitopol and Berdyansk on the Black Sea coast. After all, Ukraine's ultimate goal is to take back all of its Russian-occupied territories, including Crimea, by this summer. These deep defense lines stretching as far as Crimea show how much Russia is concerned about a possible counterattack. In this context, it's understood that the Russians are worried about losing even the Crimea they annexed in 2014, let alone the lands they have won since the beginning of the war. Ukraine's refusal to negotiate peace talks with Russia so far was due to the hope that it would be able to get its lands back by fighting and its desire to enter into peace talks that might start in the future with the successes it gained on the ground. These preparations made by both sides show that the war in Ukraine will intensify in the coming months. The heavy economic, military, social, and political effects of the war between Russia and Ukraine are changing the entire world order. Another effect of the war was that its geopolitical effects triggered military and political measures. Military measures and balances of power around the Black Sea, the Mediterranean, the Middle East, the NATO Eastern Bloc, and the Baltic Sea have suddenly changed. The biggest external impact of the war between Russia and Ukraine was arguably seen in the Baltic Sea and its surrounding countries. When Russian armies entered Ukraine, Putin actually expected a positive change for himself. He had the intention of occupying Kiev within days and making the whole of Europe accept as hegemony. But the war did not go as Putin wanted, and the balances moved against Russia. Day by day, leading NATO forces have made a serious build-up on the Russian border in Eastern Europe. Afterwards, NATO took serious initiatives in the Baltic Sea, with Sweden and Finland making their official applications to NATO. Russia has actually been completely expelled or isolated from the Baltic Sea at this point. Vladimir Putin used Kaliningrad as a trump card and tried to put pressure on his neighboring NATO countries, especially for a period. Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia faced Russian threats, one after the other. NATO, on the other hand, has prevented Russia's threatening moves with its recent breakthroughs. NATO exercises carried out in the Suwalki region, which is seen as the land crossing between Poland and Lithuania, increased the reliability of the region. These exercises, on the other hand, meant the complete closure of the link between Belarus and Kaliningrad. Afterwards, very critical negotiations were held between Estonia and Finland. As you can see on the map, Estonia's Tallinn and Finland's Helsinki port are located opposite each other in a strait in the Baltic Sea. The strait opens into the port of St. Petersburg, Russia's most important port in the Baltic, and it's on the coast. A power that can be created in the strait can completely destroy Russia's moves in the Baltic Sea and Estonia these days. He started to take a step towards this. Estonia wants to close the Baltic Sea for Russia. As a member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, Estonia is considering the possibility of effectively blocking the passage of Russian ships through the Baltic Sea. Estonia's contiguous zone practice, which can be up to 12 nautical miles from its 12-mile territorial waters, allows the country to search military vessels and civilian vessels in the Gulf of Finland to monitor compliance with Estonian laws. Currently, the Gulf of Finland within this region is designed to leave a 3-mile-wide corridor for free navigation, and Estonia will officially close this corridor by declaring it a contiguous zone. In fact, this means the naval blockade of St. Petersburg, one of the most powerful ports in the Russian Federation, and others in the Leningrad Oblast, and the blockade of the Baltic Sea of the Russian Federation. At the same time, the most important thing in this matter is not the possibility of announcement, but the possibility of fact-checking. On the Estonian side, it should be noted that the entire Estonian fleet consisted of 4 ships, the EML Wombola, Lindemann-class mine layer, and 3 Sandown-class mine layers make up the Estonian fleet. Border Services also has 1 Kindle corvettes, multi-purpose rescue ship, and boats. It should also be noted that Estonia purchased Blue Spear anti-ship missiles from Israel in 2021, which will become part of the coastal defense complex. This means that they create a serious land defense against passing ships. That is, in terms of naval capabilities, the country is unlikely to oppose the Baltic Fleet of the Russian Federation. However, this is not so important when it comes to the fact that the country is a NATO member, and any attack on a boat flying the country's flag would be an attack on the alliance itself, even if the Russian Navy is far superior to the Estonian one. Russia also knows that it cannot oppose the NATO fleet. For this reason, they are trying to act more moderately instead of taking a hard stance against Estonia's move allegations. In recent days, we can see that the Russian Navy has been acting much more moderately in the region. Hard moves often come from NATO member Baltic states. One of these drastic moves was NATO's dismissal of ambassadors as diplomatic relations between the Baltic states and Russia fell. NATO and EU members Estonia and Latvia have told their Russian ambassadors to leave the country after Moscow said it had downgraded diplomatic relations with Estonia, accusing it of being completely anti-Russian. Estonia, Latvia, and their Baltic neighbors Lithuania are among a group of NATO allies who strongly advocate Germany providing Leopard battle tanks to support Ukraine in its fight against Russian invasion. Russia's foreign ministry said it told the Estonian envoy that they should leave next month and that both countries will be represented in each other's capitals by a temporary chargé d'affaires rather than an ambassador. Foreign Minister Urmas Reinsalu said that Estonia responded in the same way by telling the Russian envoy to leave the country by February 7. Reinsalu said in a statement, "We will continue to support Ukraine as Russia plans large-scale attacks, and we call on other like-minded countries to increase their assistance to Ukraine." Lithuania dismissed the Russian ambassador and demoted its diplomatic representation in April after Ukraine accused Russian forces of killing civilians in the town of Bucha. Moscow said Monday's move was in response to Estonia's decision to reduce the size of its Russian embassy in Tallinn. This political showdown reveals the degree of tension in the region. Estonia explains its closure of the corridor for different reasons. The concept covers not only the military defense aspect, but also international activities in the direction of economic security, stability in the provision of vital services, internal security, and defense partnership. According to Estonian Prime Minister Kai Kallas, the concept was updated due to the deteriorating international situation in the West. In general, Estonia's main task in the concept is to prevent aggression against the country. An attack by Russia should be impossible. So defense spending has been increased to 2.8% GDP and will exceed €1 billion, according to Interior Minister Lauri Läänemets. The concept emphasizes the protection of the civilian population in the face of military attack. In addition, the activity of the Russian special services is a constant source of danger to the population. In fact, this is true for all other Baltic countries because we know that Russia has established elbow contact with NATO countries in all its exercises in the Baltic Sea. But in the Baltic Sea, arguably NATO needs a much stronger strategy, with Sweden and Finland soon joining the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. The alliance must act quickly to develop plans that acknowledge the new geopolitical reality in the Baltic Sea region. Once Sweden and Finland become members, the alliance will need a comprehensive security approach that addresses the region as a whole, rather than dividing it into traditional Baltic and Scandinavian camps. Since Peter the Great, Russia has had imperial plans for the region, and this is unlikely to change in the foreseeable future. Russia's tactical defeats in eastern Ukraine should not create strategic complacency among NATO policymakers to strengthen Baltic Sea's security. They should see Sweden and Finland's entry into NATO as the starting point, not the finish line. If NATO takes the right steps, the participation of Sweden and Finland will allow the alliance to more easily defend the Baltic states and more effectively deter Russian aggression in the region. Update and modernize NATO's contingency plans in the Baltic Sea region. It should establish a NATO combat group in Finland and draft a strong contingency plan for possible Russian attacks. It does not seem very likely that the war will shift to this region. There is a lot of news from the east. Here, Wagner saw that Ukrainians rapidly exploited the regained access to the road and started fierce fights to establish direct fire control over the road. The footage revealed how Wagner used a dirty approach to fighting. It showed how after Wagner realized that their assault had failed, they showed their wounded soldier and asked Ukrainians for a ceasefire to collect the killed troops. Once Ukrainians agreed and started collecting their own dead soldiers, Wagner's threw a grenade at them and ran away without picking up their dead. Last time I told you that the increased focus of Wagner forces on the western flank and attempts to enlarge the buffer zone for mitigating the risk of a Ukrainian counteroffensive led to the alleviated pressure from the Crimea highway, which also allowed the Ukrainians to start using it once again. I also told you that the Wagner forces' tempo of advances west of Bakhmut has slowed down due to heavy fire and the necessity to attack uphill. The freshest reports suggest that the tide is changing once again, and Wagner forces started to increase the number of assaults on Bakhmut. Russians still managed to achieve incremental progress and establish control over the small village of Zelensky, but their main focus undoubtedly became the encirclement. As you remember, around a week ago, Ukrainian forces took advantage of the decreased activity around the home of a road and pushed Wagner troops from an extensive trench network in front of the highway. Recent footage provided by the Ukrainian 92nd Brigade shows Wagner forces conducting an intense but unsuccessful assault on the Ukrainian position. The video also features how Wagner killed their own wounded troops to avoid slowing down. A Ukrainian commander of the unit on the ground also said that after that, Wagner asked for a ceasefire to collect the killed soldiers and promised that they would retreat. Ukrainian commanders said that they granted them the opportunity to retreat, but Wagner violated the promised ceasefire and threw a grenade. Other sources said that Wagners were more successful at advancing towards Crimea village than home of a highway. Here are the assaults were reportedly conducted directly on the village, so the area between the trenches and the village is largely in the gray zone. In any case, due to the surge in engagements in this region, the highway has been rendered unsafe once again, which has visibly started affecting the level of supplies to Bakhmut. Certain elements of Ukrainian forces have expressed the lack of necessary ammunition and said that sometimes they could not engage with the enemy due to the necessary heavy rationing of ammunition by their commanders. This caused some confusion because Wagner forces simultaneously released a video showing the devastation on their position and said that Ukrainians had plenty of ammunition. However, they showed destruction from artillery shells, and the artillery is obviously located outside Bakhmut and does not suffer from increased fire control over the home of a highway. Shortages of regular ammunition have already forced the Ukrainians to withdraw from the most challenging positions, such as the southern part of the town. Here, Ukrainians had been maintaining positions deep inside the salient, causing huge inconveniences to Russians. However, with the difficulties of keeping up the necessary intensity of fights, they have stepped back and shortened the front line. Shortened front line helps to improve the situation in the short term, especially as Wagner switched focus back to Bakhmut. Military analysts are offering several possible explanations as to why Wagner forces decreased the intensity of fights on the flanks and increased around the city. The optimistic version is that Wagner forces realized that their obsession with securing the flanks came at the cost of their control over the road, which Ukrainians started exploiting very rapidly. The pessimistic version is that Wagner infantry expanded westward faster than weather conditions were becoming suitable for the Ukrainian mechanized assault, so they created the buffer zone that they needed and went back to the encirclement. Overall, it looks like the control over the situation once again shifts from Ukrainians to Wagners. The prevention of the encirclement attempts by threatening Wagner's flanks was a temporary measure, and now the Ukrainian command needs to take the next decision. The most widely discussed options on the table are counter-offensive or withdrawal. However, based on what we have seen so far, the Ukrainian command is coming up with non-obvious tactics that allow for a gradual, not immediate, withdrawal. Right now we are at the 4th out of 5 stages of ideal gradual withdrawal. It is possible that the Ukrainians will come up with another plan to undermine Wagner's main goal, force them to temporarily change their main objective and drag the battle for Bakhmut into April closer to the dates of promised counteroffensive. It is also possible that not everything will go according to the plan. Ukrainians will not find a way to regain control over the situation and will be forced to withdraw immediately.